When an artist loves something they are working on, you can feel it coming off the page, or in this case, off the screen. And I think there's no better example of this, in my opinion, than 2007's Sword of the Stranger. You can tell every single person that worked on this movie was either highly skilled, talented, or passionate. Probably all three, to be honest. Everything from the large set pieces to the minor details is given a level of love and attention that makes the whole thing come together in a truly special way. Despite how incredible this movie is, I can probably count the number of people I've heard talk about it on one hand. So in this video, I thought I'd present what in my opinion is a genuine masterpiece. The aesthetic of Sword of the Stranger is one of dull, muted colors, which you can't really appreciate in this video. Its beautifully painted backgrounds are cast in shades of brown and green that gives you a rustic feel, meshing well with the Warring States period this movie is set in. Most of the characters sport designs that match this color scheme and the setting well. It gives the whole movie a great sense of atmosphere. Very few bright colors are used, and a few times a more distinct color is used, it's noticeable and causes you to pay attention to the way it stands out. The animation in this movie is stellar, being carried by incredible animators like Masahiro Sato, Takashi Tomioka, Masahiro Koyama, and many others, all topped off by one of the greatest climax sequences in anime, done by the legendary Yutaka Nakamura. If you've heard about this movie, you've heard about how fantastic its fights look, but basically anything that moves is well animated. People don't stand still for the sake of simplifying the animator's work. Characters move in natural, believable ways, and always seem to be doing their own thing. Closer shots have great amounts of character acting, and wider angles are used to show large crowds of people all going about their lives. No effort is spared by the production team to let the viewer immerse themselves in the setting. And truly, the animators seem to have no issue taking on just about every task required for this movie. Even more complex structures or non-human characters, which is so often made in 3D, are carefully and perfectly drawn to match the aesthetic of the movie. I rarely hear people talk about sound design in anime, which is honestly a shame. I went looking and could only find 2 people with sound credits for the whole movie, which if true is astonishing as the sound design in this movie is incredible. Sound design can be very complicated. Sounds have to fit a scene with a sense of realism, but also have to have a sense of exaggeration to breathe life into the experience. It's a similar concept to animation, where sometimes a frame has to squash or stretch a character or object to give a sense of movement. At an optimal level, the sound design heightens the emotional weight and immersion of each scene. Sword of the Stranger does this perfectly. It has a lot of small details in the sound design, like this scene, where the main character leans back, and not only can we hear the old wooden furniture he's leaning up against are just under his weight, we also hear the wood of his sword scabbard move against the flooring he is sitting on. And this scene, where the straw of the Minos blowing in the wind makes a small rustling sound in the background. These small things seem obvious when pointed out like this, but with the way our brain engages with this sort of stuff, if these sounds are missing or ill-fitted, it can be a big immersion breaker. Because we're subconsciously used to these sounds being there in the real world, we notice when they are missing. So often I hear animals in animated shows or movies simply sound wrong, but no, dogs sound like dogs, and horses sound like horses. It also confidently uses larger, more impactful sounds to let us feel the weight behind an attack, and can use very simple sound effects in tandem with just the right music to build suspense. These details aren't as distinctive or exciting to talk about as the more characteristic sounds you find in popular shonen, but in combination with Naoki Sato's score, it sets the tone perfectly for the movie's incredible visuals. And on the topic of the score, most of the tracks are incredibly grounded. The way the music goes along with each scene and accentuates either the dialogue or action is perfect. Throughout the film, there's a single theme that plays alongside our main character and the scenes associated with him. And as the story escalates, so does this track, until it eventually evolves into something befitting the incredible final battle. Combine the incredible sound design, the fantastic music, and the incredible performance of each and every voice actor, you get a carefully crafted, immersive auditory experience, which doesn't have any individual characteristic shining moment, but is consistently fantastic from the first to the last minute. The plot of this movie is pretty simplistic. Boiled down to its most basic form, the premise can be reduced to a kid runs into a good-hearted Ronin. Bad guys want to capture the kid to get a MacGuffin. And this would not be an inaccurate observation, but I do think you'd be selling the movie short if you said that's all it came down to. Because the plot is simplistic, the movie doesn't have to spend a lot of time on it, and instead uses all that time on character moments. As the plot moves forward, it forces external layers to be peeled off the characters and we learn more about them. The plot also moves all characters naturally in the same direction, allowing basically every character the movie spends time on to have some form of impact on the third act. One of the things I realized while rewatching this movie is that we can't hear the characters' thoughts. It doesn't sound like anything outlandish when I point it out so obviously, but anime will often let us hear a character's inner monologues, especially a main character, to let us more directly observe a character's mental state or to deliver exposition to us. But not letting us hear the thoughts makes non-main characters seem more important and lets us make observations about characters the same way other characters would make those, and gives us an opinion about the characters grounded in the world's perspective. It's another aspect that lets us immerse in the world. And on the topic of exposition, in many stories, characters will often kind of blurred out exposition. You will hear things you assume a character would already know be explained to them as if it's some kind of new information. Because it is new information, not to the characters but to the audience. The one conveying the message is the writer, not the character. Often this dialogue will be extremely different from other things the character says. Some sort of wise mentor character that usually only speaks in proverbs and adages will suddenly and directly inform us about the local government. Sword of the Stranger doesn't do this. As an example, when the movie wants us to be informed that the Owatari household fell, it uses a scene in which Nanashi buys a saddle, mentioning the Owatari crest branded on the saddle. The lady he's buying the saddle from asks him if the crest of an ousted family doesn't appeal to him. It conveys to us the same information, however it does so through natural dialogue while continuing Nanashi's path through the movie. The flow of the story isn't paused to give us this information, it gives us all this information we need in a natural way that also doesn't mess with the pacing. Additionally, another thing I noticed was that characters who die are essentially removed from the movie altogether. Characters will rarely reference dead people, and there are no real farewell scenes or a reflection on the death of a character. At most, the character will be on screen for a second or two after dying. It's almost like once a character loses the ability to affect the story and the movie no longer cares about them. An incredibly cold sentiment, but one that makes you hope the same won't happen to your favorite characters and makes you believe in the stakes. The movie also uses a constant level of setup and payoff. I actually lost count how many times it uses something later that was established earlier. Nanashi loots a coin sack off of a fallen enemy, then uses the coins later to pay for a room. When he dodges a throwing knife, he later uses it against another enemy, who then asks the original owner of the knife about it. The movie never obviously points any of these things out to us, and many feel like extremely minor details. However, they make each individual action feel like they matter. Things don't happen suddenly or without explanation, which is integral to the movie's finale. Within the realm of storytelling, in my opinion, a character-driven narrative is the best way to get an audience invested in those characters. Sword of the Stranger focuses on the actions the characters take and the impact that those have. And it goes both ways. Nothing ever really happens for the sake of happening. It all shows us something interesting about the characters, and sets up something important for later in the story. Almost all of the things we need to learn about the characters we see through their actions, progressively expanding in importance throughout the movie, and we start to see that there's more to our main characters the further we go. Now, to delve somewhat into the how, why, and what of the characters of Sword of the Stranger, I'll give a few examples of its phenomenal character writing. I think a perfect example of show, don't tell in character writing is Kotaro. Kotaro has very harsh and crude outward behavior, but is actually a very kind person deep down. This is never actively stated to the audience, instead it's something we learn through his actions. He steals, lies, and behaves rudely towards the people around him. However, given his circumstances, it's easy to understand why he would. He's just a kid who has to fend almost entirely for himself, something he clearly wasn't made for. We learn he's he's clumsy, unskilled, and seeks something he can truly rely on. But we also see he's actually a good kid and a solid person. He's just been forced to bite out like this in order to survive, as he doesn't have anyone to look out for him like he should at this age. These things aren't really directly said to us. Like, there isn't a character on the sidelines going, "Oh, that Kotaro kid, he's mean and clumsy, but he's got his heart in the right place," as if directly trying to talk to the viewer. No, the movie shows us these things. We see him struggle with firewood, lash out when things don't go his way, and stumble when he tries to run. But we also see him genuinely care for the only one who is truly in his corner, his dog Tobimaru. And after getting closer to Nanashi, he drops the lies he used to convince him earlier. Even though that could have gotten him in trouble at that time, he probably just thought it was the right thing to do, come clean to this person he had started to look up to. This lets us learn and see Kotaro's character and his actions and make our own decisions about him, rather than being spoon-fed an opinion to us by the writer, which adds a lot to the movie because he feels like a real person that you can make your own opinion about. To start a little trend here that'll be important for the other characters, Kotaro's name can be loosely translated as Big Son, which is a little funny given the kid's size, but I think here it means to imply the importance of Kotaro to the overarching story. Kotaro serves as the motivation for most of the movie's cast, as the bad guys want to capture him, which goes specifically against his own desire of having more agency and freedom in his own life. He seemingly has a preordained destiny that he just can't seem to escape, but he struggles at every turn and wants to be able to make his own decisions. However, being just a kid with these massive stakes put him means he can't really do anything by himself, and wherever he goes, disaster usually follows, meaning he never really gets an opportunity. When Nanashi appears on screen for the first time, it's quite well displayed to us that there's more than meets the eye. A track very different from the music used in the movie so far is played, and we quickly learn his personality is different from any other character we've seen so far. He's collected, capable, and well-meaning. However, as the story progresses, this overwhelming sense of regret fills the air around him, and as we learn more about him, we realize that he might not be the person we thought he was. Nanashi is the character the story explores on the most deep level. He's the only character whose past we directly get to see, even if it's only bits and pieces, and we see how much he struggles with it. He doesn't really seem to want to be happy, or at least doesn't know if it's okay for him to feel happy, and thus makes life harder on himself, vowing not to use his sword again because of the person he was in the past, even going so far as to tie it up with a peace knot to make sure he can't draw it. Now, I've referred to this character as Nanashi so far in this video, but that's simply because Kotaro does so. However, the actual meaning of the name Nanashi is without name or nameless. As we learn further into the movie, Nanashi was found on a shipwreck as a baby, and during his life he wasn't given a name. Instead, he was just given descriptions. Red hair, red demon, no name, which I believe is a big portion of the reason Nanashi is the way he is. Similarly to Kotaro, who currently has no parents to speak of or parental figure in his life, Nanashi was never seen as a person with his own wants, just an asset. Even Itadori Shogun, the character implied to know Nanashi even before the start of the movie, seems to only think of his sword skills, remembering those fondly, and thinking negatively of his emotions getting in the way of his God-given ability to fight. This is where the dynamic between Nanashi and Kotaro is so great to me. For Nanashi, this movie is a rediscovery of the person he wants to be. For Kotaro, it's a struggle for agency in his own life, and they are the catalyst for each other to accomplish these journeys. Like when Kotaro offers to come up with a name for Nanashi, it's almost like indirectly, he's offering him a chance to discover himself alongside a name, and Kotaro has to be quite literally freed from the confines of a special trait about himself that he never wanted to begin with. And to give an example, being taught how to ride a horse by Nanashi, something they compare to flying, a very obvious metaphor for freedom. In the end, not only does Nanashi show us that he's not the same man he was in the past, Kotaro also shows us that he's willing to defend Nanashi. What I find somewhat beautiful about that is that fundamentally they were willing to do these things for each other simply because they cared about the other person. Despite these two not starting off well together, they are empathetic towards one another's struggles, caring not about the God-given sword skills or the divine blood, but about the person who has those traits, who never asked for them in the first place. The dragon is a trope you are probably fairly familiar with. Even if you've never heard of the name, essentially a dragon is the main villain's second in command, the right-hand man. The most famous example you are definitely familiar with is Darth Vader. So as you can imagine, this character is not literally a dragon, but more of a trusted lieutenant of the bad guy. It's not uncommon for dragons to betray their evil bosses, either in an attempt to become the new main villain or to turn to the side of good. Again, just look at Darth Vader as a perfect example. Lao Lang definitely is a little more subtle, but still fulfills this trope very well. So the first thing we as the audience need to learn about Lao Lang is that he's a badass. No, literally, that's the first thing we need to learn about him. The movie wastes absolutely no time in displaying that fact. In his introductory scene, which doubles as the opening credits of the movie in a simple but very beautiful display of cinematography, he fights an entire squad of armed bandits off by himself. He makes this look effortless, taking them all down one by one as if they are mere sheep being sent to the slaughterhouse. He's strong, fast, intelligent, and confident. An essentially unstoppable fighter that revels in the thrill of combat. He loves this excitement so much that he deliberately either handicaps himself or offers an unfair advantage to each of his opponents throughout the movie so that he can test himself, which is the main thing he truly cares about, finding an opponent that can rival his abilities. Lao Lang is employed by the Ming Dynasty, which is represented entirely through the character of Lord Bailan. He doesn't actually believe or put any value in their plans, and even openly mocks their goals, but he still does as he's told and has no objections doing the bloody, dirty work of the Ming Dynasty. However, he's also perfectly willing and even suggests to lie to the emperor about certain details, which would effectively render their mission and by extension the emperor's wishes void, just for their own convenience. All of Lao Lang's actions come down to his search for a capable opponent. As he makes clear at the start of the movie, he considers every fighter he has ran into in Japan so far to be weak, so it makes sense that he tried to open an opportunity to leave the country as soon as possible, or take any opportunity to fight someone he thinks is highly skilled. Now, since I've talked about Nanashi's name, I thought I'd mention Lao Lang's name. While Lao is simply a Chinese surname, the character used to write it can also mean to collect or to gather. The character for Lang, his given name, means wolf. Now, if I were to take a very positive view at this, he could be named Wolf simply because of his appearance or his physical gifts, but more realistically, I think it's based on the idiom Lang Jing Shi Zhu, which means full of wolf-like nature, and signifies the virtue of loyalty. And not to mention wolves being seen as symbols of strength, ferocity, and power. Given Lao Lang's first language clearly seems to be Chinese, as well as complete integration in the Ming Dynasty, I'd imagine he has a similar backstory to Nanashi, having been adopted or integrated and named by the Chinese, and always having been intended to be this powerful tool for the Ming. A tool, not a person. They revere him as this demonically capable warrior, but in the same breath, nothing more than a barbarian according to the people that should be his allies. Now, I might be delving too deep, but I don't think in a movie that focuses so much on minor details, with those minor details often telling us so much, that this is just a coincidence. And if it is a coincidence, it's a cool one. Interesting to talk about here is the dynamic between Nanashi and Lao Lang. While you couldn't even really call them acquaintances, let alone rivals, their stories match each other beautifully. While a lot about Nanashi's lonesome past has been explored, it's interesting to note that what Nanashi was as a samurai, Lao Lang is as a Ming warrior. Both of them are outcasts with uncommon appearances, presumably coming from a completely different place than the nation they represent in this movie. And both of them have absolutely outstanding talents as a fighter. But their fundamental difference is that while Nanashi ran away from those talents, Lao Lang revels in them, enjoying nothing more than to engage in the carnage of his profession. So if you've read or watched or consumed any kind of story in any fashion, then you probably guessed that Lao Lang and Nanashi will fight, probably at the end of the movie. But to do so, Lao Lang's employer, Lord Bailan, stands in the way. And this is where we can take a different interpretation of Lao Lang's name, another idiom, Pi Zhe Zhang Pi De Lang, or a wolf in sheep's clothing. By fulfilling his dragon's journey and committing treachery, Lao Lang is rewarded with what he truly wants, a battle against a truly capable fighter. Now, I've done my fair share of overanalyzing throughout this video, and I'm totally fine with it if you think I'm looking a little bit too deep into things, trying to find meaning where there might not be any. But one thing you will definitely agree with me on is this final fight is phenomenal. Entering spoiler town now, by the way. Starting at the endpoint of all three main characters' journeys, Kotaro shows us how much he cares now for Nanashi, being willing to defend him even against the monstrous Lao Lang, who himself just made his final decision as the dragon archetype. Everything that I've praised this movie of so far, it takes to an absolute maximum here, showing us and not telling us in every moment of the fight how these two combatants are similar to each other, but it also takes every opportunity to show us the specific differences of these two fighters. Lao Lang's exuberant, palpable confidence against Nanashi's determination. And from before the fight even begins, to the very end, we see the differences in their strengths and fighting styles. We could see Nanashi go from warming his hands over the fire and readjusting his grip, to keeping his distance and using angles and precision, while Lao Lang's overwhelming agility, athleticism, and ferocity is the perfect opponent to pressure Nanashi, who is looking for an opportunity to end this fight with a single decisive attack, like he has done in every fight in the movie so far, fighting for that singular opportunity to take his opponent out. But Lao Lang's unrelenting assault of attacks and forceful control over the pace of the fight makes this ultimate challenge for Nanashi. With all of this being animated so beautifully, as more and more attacks are being thrown, we get constantly reminded of other things that have happened in the movie as they use moves that worked on other people, but they're not these magic special attacks. It's this well choreographed, tangible, exciting swordsmanship, with each attack showing you so much of these characters. With nothing being said throughout the whole fight, you can't help but be drawn into the engagement of the swords. And beyond even the characters and their weapons and their motivations, the fight even uses the terrain, the environment, and the things that have happened in there previously to create this perfect show that just feels so visceral and real, like it's your reward for being invested. And the fight keeps getting amped up as the pace heightens and heightens, and the moves they do become larger and more desperate, and things seem to be getting worse for Nanashi throughout the fight, as Lao Lang has this physical advantage over him. And the music that plays during this, God, the music is so goddamn good. As more happens, the differences between the two of them become more and more visible, and not until Nanashi's really backed into a corner do you relate so much with Kotaro being forced to stand by and watch helplessly as the guy that was willing to accept him so openly is desperately fighting for his life. Just like you're forced to just spectate and you realize you care about this character in this fight, and as the action continues to escalate, you actually wonder how it's going to end, because the movie does so well of convincing you of the stakes that you actually want him to survive this incredible battle that keeps ramping up. And then finally this pot that has been stirring and stirring boils over.